Lebanese government has resigned amid growing public anger following a devastating explosion in Beirut on the 4th of August that killed at least 200 and injured about 5,000 others. The blast came at a difficult time for Lebanon, which is not only trying to curb the spread of the coronavirus but is also mired in an unprecedented economic crisis. The economic situation has pushed tens of thousands of people into poverty and triggered large anti government protests. In this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the blast in Beirut and the impact it has had on the country, the region, and the world. Joining me on the program today are Anil Trigunayak, former ambassador, Professor A.K. Pasha, Center for West Asian Studies, JNU, and Dr. Wail Awad, West Asia expert. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. All right, Ambassador, let me start the program with you first. You know, the kind of impact that the blast has had. Of course, Lebanon was going through a difficult phase, but, the blast seems to have just boiled over, spilled everything over, and the scales have been tipped on the other side now.
Yes, you are so right. In fact, this was said to be the biggest and most powerful non-nuclear blast in several decades. And it has created, unprecedented disaster like any war happens. More than 300,000 people are really homeless today. And about 200 people died and more than 6,000 people were injured. They are still searching. At the same time, the country has been very unfortunate in many ways. For several years now, they have had civil war. They have had invasions by Israel, by Syria at one time, invited, and then the interplay of the French and the others, Saudi Arabia. So the country has been facing the civil war-like situation for a very long time. Moreover, the economy of the country has been going down. There have been problems of corruption. There is the problem of lack of entrepreneurship. Also, the people don't get the opportunities, and then when you are in a warlike situation, become sandwiched into this kind of a state. This becomes increasingly difficult. And the Lebanese are very well-known entrepreneurs all over the world. Wherever you go, they have done extremely well, and they are very well attached to their country. And it's a country which, in my view, was used to be known as, because of its financial institutions and banking institutions, as Switzerland of the East, or because of its beauty and brilliance, it was called as the Paris of the Middle East. And it's an absolutely fabulous country, strategically located, yet it has gone through this kind of a downturn, and the people have really become very frustrated with the inept governments. Now, this is also due to the kind of political system that they have really devised for themselves, which is based on confessions. The president has to be this from Maronites, or the Sunni should be the prime minister, the speaker should be Shia, those kind of things. That is, when you have this situation, then it is very difficult to form the government. So after the 2018 elections, I remember I visited Beirut, and our ambassador could not present his credentials, or for that matter, the Lebanese ambassador could not be appointed. So things have really become difficult. Moreover, the problem is that they had a problem with Saad Hariri, as you know, that the previous the prime minister had some problem in Saudi Arabia. So all these things have been boiling over. The people want things to move, and this Arab Spring kind of a thing has continued. And I think there's a second wave that has come in, and now this particular blast has actually given them the trigger. Right. So the people saw the inept handling. They saw that this kind of huge quantities of unclaimed nitrate was lying there in without any proper custody or proper precautions. So obviously, then who do you blame for it? You blame the government. If the government doesn't know that in the half a kilometer from your office you have such a huge quantity of nitrate lying there, which could be devastating. And especially when you are having problems with the neighborhood. So anybody can trigger it. So that is why I think that the people have found the way, and that I'm glad that the government has actually resigned, because it was really doing nothing since it took over. It was made in such a way that it could not do much, in my view. Right. So I believe that the people are going to rise, and I hope that the international community does not attach too many conditions when it provides the kind of assistance that is needed at the moment.
All right, Professor, let me bring you into the picture now. There was if you look at the last 2 decades, there was a brief period in between, I think between 2006 and 2010, when the Lebanese economy was doing decently well, growing probably at almost double-digit figures. But post that, we've seen the economy, just dive down completely. So what has gone wrong really as far as Lebanon's economy is concerned? What can we attribute to what the Lebanese economy is going through right now?
Yeah, the Lebanese state and its economy are intrinsically linked with the regional economies, and Lebanon has been a victim of foreign intervention from almost all countries in the region, apart from the global major players, from Israel to Syria to Iran to Iraq, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Turkey, all have dabbled in the internal affairs of Lebanon, with the result when Saudi Arabia took upon itself as a supporter of the Hariri family, Rafiq Hariri, he got billions of dollars of financial aid from Saudi Arabia, both public and private, and from other rich Gulf countries, which fueled the economic development, which was necessary because after the civil war, in the 1980s, 89 when it ended, there was not much of development. So it accelerated during the period which you have mentioned. And Lebanon prospered, even though it had to face a war in 2006, which led to Israeli attack on Beirut and devastated much of its economy. And this pouring of resources from Iran to Gulf countries and the diaspora, large Lebanese diaspora of Maronites and Sunni, Shia, they also poured billions of dollars to make Lebanon what it was before the civil war in 75. So all the actors thought that Lebanon can be rebuilt to its former glory and see it as a very attractive place for not only tourism, but also for entrepreneurial skills, because every Arab could come and invest in almost all sectors there. That's how, it saw pumping of resources from the regional actors primarily, and also the international actors from China to Russia to America, European Union. All of them, they thought that Lebanon should be a model country in the region, just as it prospered in the 50s and 60s until it was devastated during the 75, 89 civil war. But the problem with Lebanon is, the weak government there, based on sectarianism, which the ambassador very ably articulated, is because of the French imposed constitution. Apart from Japan, Lebanon is the only other country which has a foreign imposed constitution way back in 1924 during the mandate period. And during the mandate and up to 1948, the French ruled through emergency powers because they had created a greater Lebanon from a small Lebanon of Christian minority Maronites based on the Mount Lebanon area. So they expanded, took away much of the Syrian Sunni-dominated areas and attached it to Lebanon, which led to this problem because the French expected the Syrian Muslims to leave the territory and go back to Syria, just as the Israelis expected the Palestinians to leave the Palestinian territory and go back and merge in the Arab territory. So the root cause of the problem, like the British who created the Palestine problem, the root cause is created by the French, and that has got inextricably linked with its ambitions in the region, and it has become a free play for all the regional actors. The Egyptians were dominant in the 50s and 60s. Then, of course, after the Iranian Revolution, Iran came into the picture to prevent the division of Lebanon. Syria intervened there officially in 75. So almost all actors have, in one way or the other, intervened and brought this situation. And the emergence of Hezbollah in the 90s mainly because of the Israeli invasion in 1982, has become a source of resistance,
Right.
because Hezbollah is seen as a powerful actor which got the Israelis out in 2000 after its invasion and occupation. So now the Israelis and the Americans and the others are trying to articulate the grievances of the Lebanese, putting the blame on Hezbollah as the real culprit, whereas it is a defender, because Lebanon doesn't have a strong military to defend against a military superpower like Israel. So in
point
that
taken.
way, the articulation of the demands, which are basically very modest of the Lebanese, but it has got inextricably linked with the Palestinian refugee presence there, then now the Syrian refugees in Lebanon, and its geopolitical importance to major players in the region and beyond.
Right. So there are several aspects there attached to the present situation as far as Lebanon is concerned. We'll talk about the region and the other external players in just a bit. But before that, let's talk about the government and the political system. Mr. Wailawad, as far as the government is concerned, we've seen, I think, two governments in less than a year's time. In 2019 is when the 2019 ended. The previous government, of course, stepped down. Now we have the new government too stepping down. So, why did the government resign first and foremost, and how difficult is it for the government or the political class to function in Lebanon?
Thank you. And I think after listening to both the distinguished guests, I would like to add a few points here before I answer your question, which is very important, that the 100 years of creation of Lebanon, Republic of Lebanon, was done after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. And then during the occupation of France, of Syria and Lebanon, they have encarved a lot of the Syrian territories. And if you look at the map of between Syria and Lebanon, you will be surprised if you compare it to the other maps of the Arab world, where it is actually a zigzag, because the French used to take a village of Christian, keep the Sunni in the other side. So it was a zigzag kind of a border between the two countries. And we were anticipating in the near future that this crisis will be culminating, because the French tried to make a Christians majority state, which is called Greater Lebanon, during their occupation, and there where the problem have started. So the civil war in Lebanon have created a kind of 17 years of fighting among different groups, have also led to the Taif agreement, which was signed in 1991 in Saudi Arabia. And they came up with the new government, which is a sectarian democracy, where they have had that structure of different sects that they can sow. So ultimately, what I'm trying to say here, any country has been created throughout history is actually meant that this is the end of it will end up, because there is no way you can settle that. That's where you have most of the countries have really involved, and the regional player and international players have played a major role in destabilizing this small, tiny country. And I will add one more point, which is very important to all of us to understand the root of terrorism, which have started after the invasion of Iraq by the United States, where al-Zarqawi had a quite activity inside Syria and Lebanon, and he was bombed with the Gulf money into the region, where he has created, a new way of buying terrorists and Takfiri group, which have been flourished inside Lebanon. So Lebanon was Hezbollah, the national resistance to the occupation of Israel, was created because of Israeli occupation. Therefore, to counter the Shia power in Lebanon, the Sunni movement have come into Lebanon, and they have been created. And that's why you see now Turkey is stepping in, France is stepping in for the Christians, and Saudi Arabia and Qatar also pumping the monies to their Sunnis supporters. So the fact of the matter is that the government of Lebanon is totally, the whole official system of Lebanon, is totally corrupted. Rafiq al-Hariri, when he was brought to Lebanon, Lebanon had only $5 billion debt. Now Lebanon having $90 billion debt. So where this money goes for? Therefore, it gives you a clear picture how much corruption have intervened inside the system. And thanks to the corruption, actually, Frank, I must say here that the corruption in Lebanon have made half of the nitrite, which was stored in Beirut, being smuggled into Syria and bombing Idlib, bombing the public property, the hospitals, the government, the people. It's all because of the nitrite, which was stored in unknown, on mysterious ship, landed there, and because of corruption kept there. So when the government of Lebanon has been collapsing one after the other, and a successful government of Lebanon refused to take this decision, a new government where the people start projecting that this is a face of Hezbollah government, because Hassan Diab was supported by Hezbollah government 6 months within their taking over, he was trying to understand what is this nitrite doing there. So we suddenly, after the appointed the officials to deal with it, one of the major general was assassinated, and then we have suddenly, when they have started visiting the port to find out, the whole thing's blew up. What is happening in Lebanon is a clear picture that the American, the West, the Israelis, everybody is a culprit of a first crime, a humanity crime against humanity, a crime of first degree. So Lebanon is a victim of the regional players, of the internal, because we used to say it is external power that have been influencing the policy of Lebanon. But the fact of the matter, this bomb have really exposed the internal corruptions, and the can of worms have come up open to show how much this country is trying to destabilize. So therefore, there are, I think the regional element and the wider perspective of it is to look at it from different angle, where you will see the Lebanese now is heading toward again, because there are some people in France or in the West think that the remnants of colonial power, that they can come back to Syria and Lebanon and say, okay, this is a mandate, we needed an international protection and right to protection, so on and so forth. So Turkey, as a new element, stepped in to support the Sunni now. France came to support the Christians, and then Iran is supporting the Shia. So again, we are in the quagmire of a war in the Mediterranean for two reasons. One is that there is a discovery of gas and oil in the Mediterranean, where the Lebanese shore having 2/3 of it, and Israel is forcing Lebanon to have the maritime border, which they have refused. Second is Hezbollah and the resistance forces. They have failed militarily to remove it. So therefore, if you now go back to civil war, you will have a reason to destroy Lebanon again and dismantle the power of Hezbollah. These are the two issues which is main. And for the United States, including these two issues, is the dominance and security of Israel is of a prime importance for them. So any government of Lebanon will come, it has to be accepted by the international community. There is no question of a government of Lebanon come, of technocrats and all, because what happened is, it is the system set up in such a way that the Sunni will vote for the Sunni, the Shia will vote for the Shia, and the Christian, and so on and so forth. So how you will have a new government where the same faces will come back again? So therefore, palliative treatment of Lebanon is meant that to destroy this country. So there is a point of interest of other. Look at Turkey stepping in now and saying, I'm giving the nationality of the Turkoman to come to Lebanon, and from Lebanon, and France will go to the Christian. So basically, you wanted to create a small cantons, ghettos inside this part of the world, to make it more of a hard Takfiri Sunni group around, where the Christian ran away, where minorities ran away, and then you have another reason that you recolonize this part, and the people of the region should not have any time of relaxation and stability and prosperity.
Okay, points taken. Now let's take the discussion forward and talk about the region and what all of this means for the region as well. But I'm going to ask all my panelists to be brief going forward. We've got limited time on the program. We spent a lot of time in our opening remarks. So, Ambassador, what does this mean for the region?
Well, this is also a continuation, in my view, of the overall frustration at the popular level in the region. But the region has many other things. For example, there are regional hotspots that are still not addressed. You have the Yemen war is still going on. You have the blockade between Saudi Arabia and the other 4 countries, Qatar, that is still continuing. The Iran and Saudi Arabia, Iran and US conflict is still very much there. Palestinian cause is still simmering very hard. So the whole of the region is continuing in a very difficult manner. Now, in this situation, what is happening in Libya and Syrian war, we know what is happening in Syria situation as well. But what I feel is that this is going to remain unstable for some time more. And Turkey, as Dr. Awad also said, is becoming a new major player in the region, whether it is in Libya intervention or we are looking at it even in Libya, where I was there during the revolution. But today, this has become a free-for-all for everyone for the last decade or so. So there are greater external interventions. The new power equations are emerging. Basically, Israel is coming a little bit more closer to some of the Sunni Arab states like Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, and Oman. And we have the Turkey, China, Pakistan, Russia, and that kind of group is again emerging, which could be as a counterweight. US seems to be withdrawing from the region, but at the same time playing a negative role, not a positive role. We hope that after the November elections, there may be a rethink of their Middle East policy, and that could bring about. And of course, COVID-19 is going to have a greater impact on the whole region, and so the whole economies are going under. So that is something that is going to have a major impact for times to come.
Right. Professor, very quickly, so is this another theater really as far as the Turkey and Saudi Arabia rivalry is concerned?
Yes, it is
Yes,
not just Turkey and Saudi Arabia, but Iran. But the principal foreign actor, which is destabilizing the peace, security, and stability, is its neighbor Israel, because Israel invaded in '82, and it expected Lebanon to sign a peace treaty like Egypt and Jordan have signed. But because of the unresolved Golan problem with Syria and Syrian influence in Lebanon, the situation could not go in the direction of Israel and the West. So since 1982, it has been a tug of war between Lebanon and Israel, both trying to impose their views. We saw the 2006 Israeli invasion that was aimed to decimate Hezbollah, like they did '82 to decimate the PLO, which did not solve the problem because there are huge number of Palestinian refugees there, and Israel has been targeting Lebanon. And after the Syrian support to, the Iranian support to Hezbollah and to Syria, Israel is alarmed that its borders have become more insecure. So Israel is rampantly attacking not only targets in Lebanon but also in Syria in the name of preventing the flow of weapons from Iran to Syria and from Syria to Lebanon. Whereas the actual reason is to force Lebanon to sign a peace treaty like it has done with Jordan and Israel. So it is the peace, security, stability, and proper systemic functioning in Lebanon is inextricably linked with the Arab-Israeli conflict. Otherwise, I don't see any prospect of peace returning to Lebanon.
Right. So, while Awad, let's talk about Syria now, because Lebanon and Syria share a huge border as well. So the last 10 years have been extremely volatile as far as Syria is concerned too. So how much of an impact is what is happening in Syria had on what's happening in Lebanon?
Absolutely, it's a major impact, Frank. In fact, there are 45 Syrians lost their life in this bomb, actually, and we have 2 million people on the border are related in both sides. Of the family have been separated, or the Christians and the Muslim, the Sunni and the other part where they have been divided. So therefore, anything happens to Lebanon, Syria bleed also on that. So therefore, we are at the receiving end of anything developing in this region, particularly because of the terrorism also spreading. And there was lots of influx of terrorist organizations supported by certain elements within the officials of Lebanon into Syria, and they have inflicted a major blow to the most of the Syrian property and human loss in our lives. So therefore, a stable Lebanon is one of the prime important for Syria. In fact, during the civil war, it was the Arab League which have given the mandate for Arab forces to go, but it was only Syria left on that, and that's why we were being accused that we have been not giving the Lebanese their peace, their stability. But the fact of the matter, it is two states of one nation. So I can't go beyond that. And my heart bleeds for the Lebanese and everybody who lost their lives. So therefore, anything happening in Lebanon is definitely going to happen to us. And remember also that anybody fall on the line of the maritime of the Silk Road of the China, 60 countries, including Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and even in Iran, all these countries are going to suffer because there is a wider perspective to look at the crisis, is that the fighting between the United States and its allies and also the China and trying to have influence in this part of the world. So therefore, Israel is trying to have a new line of Haifa to Saudi Arabia. They wanted to avoid the Silk Road of Lebanon, Syria, Iran, and also there you have to look into those aspects of the crisis. So therefore, we are not in isolation for what's developing in the whole region. And I think what's going to happen in Lebanon after next week, where the verdict of the Prime Minister assassination, Rafiq al-Hariri, will also have an impact. And either we are heading for a civil war, because the prime important for US and Israel is to dismantle the power of Hezbollah. The deterrence power of Hezbollah have made Israel life a hell, because Israeli generals used to say we fly over Lebanon in a picnic, we fly over Syria as a hell. Now both the country have been destroyed, so Lebanon remain with little deterrence, and I think they will do their best to remove this deterrence out of the region. At the cost of the people.
Yes, time to get closing comments. Go ahead, Professor. You have raised your hand. The floor is yours.
Yeah, see, just to summarize briefly, you see, the Lebanese, most of them who are young people who have been born since after the Taif Accord, majority of them are young people. They have become tired of this constitution, which has become non-functional because it is based on sectarian division of government and spoils. So what they are, I think, common Lebanese are demanding is an end to this old political system, which has become, which has lost its legitimacy and non-functional. They want a normal constitution like any other written constitution, which allows all of them to participate irrespective of the communal association, whether it's a Mennonite Christian or Greek Orthodox or Sunni, Shia, or Druze, or so on and so forth. So the youngsters are earning for transparent political system, because now it is based on corruption, warlords, tribalism, sectarianism, fiefdom, spoil system. All this has brought havoc, because it has allowed the regional and international players to poke their nose and destabilize whenever they wanted. And the common people have suffered over the last several decades. So they want to have a new political system which will give and articulate their aspirations and expectations.
Sure. Ambassador, best way forward.
Well, I want to say that what Professor said is absolutely correct. That there must be a system whereby countries, especially the Western countries and Russia, should agree that they want this country to have a normal political life. And they strive for it. They should provide all the assistance that is necessary. I just want to add one word, that India has been present for a very long time there, and in the UNIFIL, which is the United Nations Agency on the southern border with Israel, there Indian forces have been contributing a great deal for the stability in the region. So I hope that the Lebanese will come out of it and develop like a normal nation.
And Wahil Awad, close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
Thank you, Frank. I think the issue, I fully agree that it is the resolution of a Palestinian state in the region, and Israel have to realize that annihilation of Palestine is not meant that you destroy the axis of resistance to your occupation and aggression and expansion in the region. And the more you will be able to protect this axis of resistance extended from Palestine to Iran, it will be very difficult for Israel and its allies in the region, where Saudi Arabia and some other of the Gulf countries are trying to appease the American foreign policy in the region, will not bring a stable region. What we need is a prosperity, coexistence, and also the right of the Palestinians to have their own, independent state within their own country and own land.
Okay, all right. On that note, then I'll call it a wrap from this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. The situation in Lebanon at the moment is dicey and it's very fragile, is what the panelists are suggesting. We need to give Lebanon space to develop its own system and to ensure that it comes out of this particular crisis on top, and also it will help the region as a whole, is what the panelists are suggesting. There are both internal and external factors at play right